Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New Zealand jazz band leader Ben Wilcock. He opened up about his new 2021 CD, The River Tethys. He was born in Hamilton, New Zealand, and is well known as a band leader for the jazz trio The Jelly Rolls and his work as a sideman with a variety of New Zealand soul singers. He's got a great story. Enjoy. Well, hey, thanks for taking a minute out. I appreciate it.
Cool lads.
You have a brand new album coming out, and I don't know exactly what the temperature for COVID is over in New Zealand, but it's obviously during a time where, you know, we're closer to the end of it than we are at the beginning of it. How do you feel about this coming out in light of what we've been living through and all of that?
Yeah, interesting times, eh? Well, I guess for New Zealand, we're a little bit ahead of the game in that we came out of a lockdown a long time ago, and early, like March last year, we went on a 7-week lockdown, and since then we haven't really had any COVID. We've had, I think, 23 deaths since the thing started. You know, we've been acting almost as normal since about June last year. In saying that, we've still got the borders closed and no one's coming into the country. And occasionally, if there's a community transmission, then there is a lockdown. So the impact for us is, like, locally we can perform and we can gig, and there's jazz festivals. We've played 2 jazz festivals this year already. But in terms of touring internationally, that's where it's had the biggest impact for me. Like the last couple of years, we've been going to the Edinburgh Jazz Festival, and the plan was to carry that on and continue with that trip, and also a tour of Australia, and of course that all had to get put on hold. So that's a shame, but I think comparatively, it's still not too bad, you know, compared to some parts of the world.
How does it feel to be able to release music now and be at a point where you can tour and kind of look back on, kind of look ahead, so to speak, with a brand new album? How does that feel?
It feels good, man. You know, anytime you put out an album, it's a lot goes into it. A lot of work, a lot of prep, a lot of lining up of dates and people and things like that. So it's always a good feeling, which should be a good feeling anyway. So this particular album, it has a theme that almost relates to this time, in that when we spend a lot of time at home. I don't know about you guys, but I spend a lot of time when we're in lockdown looking up at the stars and contemplating and thinking about life and what's going on. So I guess this album is a result of music that was composed throughout that time, and it feels good to get it out, that's for sure.
So talk to me a little bit about your beginnings in jazz and how all of this started for you.
I learned the piano as a kid, so when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and not really classical. I'm not classically trained. I started in the Yamaha school. I went and did a degree in jazz performance when I was 17 in Wellington, which is the capital city. There's a great jazz school down in Wellington, and a great jazz scene, actually. When I left the university, I was about 21, I think, and ended up touring with a theatre show, which took me to places. I came back to Edinburgh Fringe Festival, to Singapore, all over the place, national tours of New Zealand, which is a great gig for a 21-year-old. And I was literally playing the part of an onstage hotel piano player, which is what I was doing at the time to make a living. So there's no acting required, you know. And then after that, I ended up staying in the UK for about 5 years with my wife, and playing in jazz clubs and hotels and all over the shop, you know, blues bands and whatever I could to make a living. And when we came back to New Zealand in 2008, I started touring with mostly soul singers, to be honest, and a few of these sort of different soul and R&B singers, again, took me back overseas to, well, all around the world. After spending quite a lot of time doing that, I met the drummer in the band and the co-founder of the record label that we put our music out on, Big Records. His name's John Ray. He's a Scottish drummer and composer, and we sang in a little trio, sort of like Ahmed Jamal, Errol Garner, some sort of crossover between those two styles, with a bass player, Dan Yipsey, and that's getting almost 10 years ago now, and we decided we've got to put some music out, and since we formed our record label in 2014, I think we've now got 13 albums out, and by the end of the year we'll probably have around 18 on our label.
Now that the world collectively is waking up and things are getting back, how do you see the world of jazz musicians in the community emerging stronger because of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I've seen a lot of through all this COVID pandemic is a lot of collaborations online. So not just jazz musicians, but musicians in general have been creating these wonderful collaborations from all corners of the globe, and I think that's been really cool. But I also think that jazz is something that has a magic when it's played live, not just for the audience but for the musicians as well. Like I love being on stage making music organically with acoustic instruments in that moment, and I think as people emerge, as the world emerges from this, I really hope that there'll be lots of gigs, lots of concerts, and people will really want to come out and be part of that. And I think also there might be some new networks and connections and collaborations and projects that emerge out of this, and people have found ways to do things that they might not have considered before, primarily through using the internet, I guess. But in general, yeah, I really hope that people get back out and enjoy that live, real feeling of playing music together.
The one thing that's fascinating about doing this line of work of interviewing musicians is that there's always these pockets of musicians from around the world, and I'm not really familiar with the New Zealand scene, but it's so wide-stretching, the jazz idiom, and I'm curious, what's the prevalence of jazz? How strong is it where you're at and kind of in general in New Zealand?
We have a population of just under 5 million, and with only probably 1 million in the South Island, so the majority of the population is in the North Island, and in the North Island there's two largest cities, what we call large cities anyway. We've got Auckland in the north, which has 1.5 million, and Wellington, which has around 500,000. And both of those cities have good jazz scenes, especially Wellington. Wellington has a great jazz scene where you can, before I moved away from Wellington, I live in a little town called Rotorua, which is only has a population of 65,000. So there's not much of a jazz scene here, but down in Wellington I was gigging sort of 4 nights a week as a piano player. So for the size of the town, it's go out most nights of the week and find some really interesting jazz too, experimental stuff, really cutting edge concerts and groups, and a great jazz festival, some really good jazz festivals here. So I mean, for the size of the country, we definitely have a good, strong jazz community and jazz scene, and even regionally as well. Like you can go to these tiny towns, and just about every sort of small town has a monthly jazz club that will meet on the first Sunday of the month, say, and get an attendance between 100 and 200 people. So I think it's pretty healthy, to be honest.
Every day you wake up, you get a chance to create music as a professional musician. What's the best part of being a professional musician?
I think you actually said it. Waking up and being able to create some music. I love just, what do you call it, I guess experimenting. We call it tutuing, you might call it noodling or messing about on the piano, just starting with absolutely nothing. And fast forward a few months, you've got the bones of an album. And I also think the community, the network, especially in the jazz world, it's like being part of a family, which is a pretty cool way to make a living. It's hard. Like you have to work really hard to generate income and and all that kind of thing. But definitely not complaining, put it that way.
So why do you love jazz?
Well, I was introduced to jazz by my father, my mother and my father, who were both musical people. And I think I remember going to a concert when I was about, 12-year-old kid. And it was the Glenn Miller story with a big band. And I thought it was so cool, man. I think the next concert I went to was Harry Connick Jr. And then watching him play the piano. That was his album, She. Do you remember that?
Yo, that's such a great album.
Oh, it's a fantastic album. It was it was really cool. So those are good memories, and that's where it all started for me. Again, just not being classically trained and always encouraged to experiment and just to enjoy music. So I think that's continued and carried on with me throughout my life.
So when we do return more in earnest to the stage, you're on the stage, we're in the audience. What do you hope we realize about the power of live music that a lot of us have been away from for so long?
I love the connection you can make with an audience as a performer, even and especially without talking. So playing in a piano trio, for example, and in the height of some up-tempo, frenetic, improvised piece, you can definitely feel it or not if the audience is engaged. And I love that. I love that within the audience there's going to be people that are jazz aficionados and jazz experts and even jazz musicians, of course. And then there are people that know a little bit about it, and then there are people undoubtedly that this might be their first time at a jazz gig, and they've probably asking themselves what's going on, where's the melody. But I like that. I like that buzz. I think jazz is great live, and I think it's a nice way for an audience, for people who are new to the idiom, to get into it, is to actually go to a live gig and experience the energy that comes off stage.
Everyone has a perception or an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you're the one living your life. Who do you think you are?
Yeah, okay. Who do I think? Wow, what a question.
Yeah.
Who do you think you are? Isn't there a song?
Yeah, probably a lot of them.
Well, I consider myself a pianist, a piano player, jazz piano player. Whether or not that's how people perceive me, I don't know. It's hard to gauge that, but I know through years of being a touring musician and playing a lot of music for other people, as a hired gun, as a keyboard player, I've realised that what I really want to do and what I like to do, where I'm in my happy place, is playing an acoustic piano in a jazz setting. So that's what I think I am. I'm someone who likes to experiment with music and try different forms, different concepts on the bandstand, and go for it too. I try not to be too safe. So I think that's probably a fair summation of who I am at the moment.
Beautiful. Final question. If you could get into a time machine and see any musician, any jazz musician at any time in history, who would you go see?
I'd be front row seeing Errol Garner in probably the late 50s, I reckon.
That'd be beautiful, man. Yeah.
It would, wouldn't it?
Oh, man, it would be, for sure. Ben, hey, thank you for taking some time out for Neon Jazz. Good luck with the album and the return to the live stage. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks heaps, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in New Zealand, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Ben for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.